Now it's time to bring in our U.S. Report regular, former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, great to have you here at the end of a historic week. Now, the big topic, of course, is the indictment, and Trump's 2024 White House campaign says he raised $7 million since being indicted. When will the Democrats learn that all of these sorts of attacks kind of boost his chances of getting back to the White House?
Well, James, they certainly want to boost his chances of being the Republican candidate. Keep in mind, yes, they recognize the fact that this makes him more likely to be the Republican nominee. They recognize the fact that the media attention is going to help him raise money. They especially recognize the fact that the media attention makes it harder for folks like Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, and Mike Pence. So in a strange kind of way, Donald Trump and the left agree on one thing, which is they want Donald Trump to be the Republican nominee. Take it to the next level. The Manhattan case, the Stormy Daniels hush money criminal case, is now set for March. My understanding of talking to folks on both sides of the equation is that the Democrat DA wanted it in March, and the Trump team wanted it in March because that's the middle of the Republican primaries. And both of those parties think that having the trial in March will help Trump. So, yeah, it doesn't surprise me he raised a lot of money. It doesn't surprise me the Democrats want him to raise a lot of money. The real question is, as they did in 2016, are the Democrats really shooting themselves in the foot and making it more likely that he wins a general election, not just the Republican primary?
And so is that why, though, you see different people in the field making very different calculations? You've seen Christie attacking Donald Trump. You see Ron DeSantis saying, no, this is a witch hunt. Where are the various other big players in the race falling on this?
It's sort of all over the place. Christie has attacked from the very beginning. That's not calculated. That's just Christie. We may talk more about that in a second. Ron DeSantis has sort of danced around the issue, poked at Trump without really saying anything. And Nikki Haley, as is typical for Nikki Haley, has sort of supported Trump at one time and then attacked him at another. Keep in mind, all of these folks are hamstrung, including Haley. They're hamstrung by the fact that we don't know all the facts yet. I think Tim Scott handled it very well. He said, look, these are very, very serious charges. We need to take them very seriously, but everybody's innocent until proven guilty. I don't know what you say beyond that. The indictment is very detailed, but again, I'm talking to folks who are federal prosecutors who tell me to expect more information to come out before the trial. And it's not just what we see in the indictment. I think what Republicans are afraid of is either attacking Trump right now and finding out the case is really weak, or probably more likely defending Trump now and finding out the case is much stronger than we think that it is. This is a very different deal than Manhattan. Manhattan was a weak case across the board. Everybody knows it. Even the Democrats were defending President Trump on the hush money payments. This is a different story entirely.
Well, yeah, I know. And you could just tell by watching some of the cable news stations like MSNBC and CNN when they were almost crestfallen when the New York indictment was read out. And then with this, you could see them just salivating. But I want to talk, because you mentioned Christie before. And one of the things I love about having you on the show is that you kind of introduce Australians to some of these new characters that they may not be so familiar with. So who is Christie? And you've written a piece this week for The Hill saying that he is someone to watch. I found that an interesting piece. I was a little startled, but I found it compelling. Tell us who he is and why we should be keeping an eye on him.
Yeah. Christie was sort of Trump before Trump was Trump. He was a straight-talking, no BS, sort of iconoclastic politician, broke out of the mold of sort of the staid, Bob Dole Republican, Mitt Romney Republican. He's a very sort of down-to-earth, brusque kind of guy. And he did that before Donald Trump came onto the scene. He did very poorly in 2016, but he was a Republican elected in a deep blue state in New Jersey twice, and he was very popular there. He's for real. I don't think he can win. He called me right before he announced his presidential campaign. I sat down with him for about 2 hours in Newark, and I got the very, very distinct impression that he was doing this almost for fun, that he really doesn't like Donald Trump. He's known Donald Trump for 20 years. He feels like Donald Trump has mistreated him. He helped Donald Trump get elected in 2016 and then sort of kicked him to the side, didn't give him any cabinet positions, didn't give him the chief of staff. He feels like he needs a little bit of revenge here, and he's going after Donald Trump, if for no other reason, but He just doesn't like him very much. That's a sort of refreshing sort of vitality to American politics. There's not a lot of pretense here. He doesn't like Donald Trump. He's got the ability to go at Donald Trump in a way that a lot of the other candidates don't. You mind? He's rough and tumble New Jersey. Trump is rough and tumble New York. The cities are only separated by a river. He can attack Trump in ways that Mike Pence certainly can't, and Tim Scott can't, and Ron DeSantis wants to but probably can't. Yeah, I think he's the most interesting person in the race. I don't think he can win, but he might be the person to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't.
That's really interesting you say that, Mick. And one of the things that I always sort of keep in mind in my personal life is choose your enemies wisely because you wind up becoming them. Is there a danger that in kind of running a vendetta against Trump that Christie winds up taking on a lot of those characteristics? You know, they've both got that earthiness and that swagger, but, you know, also some of the more negative things as well for Christie.
Sure, and that's always the risk. Again, I don't think Christie. If I had to bet right now, Christie's not going to be president. But I think his calculation is, I'm not, even if I'm not president, if I can make it so that Tim Scott can be president, if I can make it so that Nikki Haley can be president, if I can make it so that Ron DeSantis can be president, then I get to be the attorney general. Maybe I get to be the chief of staff. I'm back in the game. I'm back in government. He's a young man. He's probably my age in his late 50s. So I think it's a calculated risk that he's taking. And what's he got to lose? I mean, he's out of politics otherwise anyway. He's not been in office for 6 years. He's got to do something now because you can't stay relevant in my country for 6, 8, 10 years without being in office. So again, I think it's a calculated risk, but it's mostly driven by personal animus, which, if nothing else, will make for great press over the course of the next year. You and I are going to have a lot of fun, James, talking about Christie attacking Donald Trump.
And I bet we're going to get some pretty good vision out of that as well. And finally, before I let you go, Mick, let's talk about the running mate stakes here. One thing I saw interesting was that Vivek Ramaswami, who I think is one of the most interesting brains on the campaign trail right now, he's filed an FOI request trying to obtain communications connected to Trump's indictment. Why is he doing this? And do you think that he's angling maybe for a second spot on the Trump ticket?
You know, anybody who's not attacking Donald Trump aggressively is being accused of running for vice president. I've heard it about Vivek Ramaswamy. I've heard it about Nikki Haley. I've heard it about Tim Scott. I don't believe it for Tim Scott. I do believe it for Nikki Haley. I don't know Vivek Ramaswamy enough to know. But there's also another possibility, which is this is just a really good topic for a Republican candidate for president. The weaponization of the government against its political allies is solid gold real estate for any Republican right now. You hear all of them talking about it. It's an issue, James, that resonates not only with Republican voters, but with centrist voters. Go back to what we talked about with that Manhattan DA charge against Donald Trump. Even the Democrats were defending Trump at that time somewhere, and a lot of the independents were, because they thought this was wrong. They thought it was an abuse of power, and they thought it was the type of thing that only happens in third world banana republics. Americans don't like to think that the Department of Justice is a political tool. So for Ramaswamy to press this thing by asking for these documents, I think is just smart politics, regardless of whether or not he's running for the top spot, the second spot, or a spot in the cabinet.
Mick Mulvaney, I think it's very much like the sort of Australian concept of a fair go, and Americans don't like to see it violated. Thank you so much for joining us this week on the U.S. Report.